Kashin Koji doesn't want Boruto to master or awaken the Jougan. In other words, Koji is actually hiding the absolute power of Boruto's pure eye. Yeah, that's quite a controversial opening statement for some fandoms, but yeah, that's just how it is. I'm Nim without the E. Let's talk about some rather strange things that are, of course, full of question marks. After several arcs, especially with the revelations in chapter 26, have you ever thought about it? Or maybe felt suspicious and curious? I mean, we know that Koji deliberately created a scenario where some of Boruto's friends had to be sacrificed and die on the battlefield just to awaken Sarada's power. And at this point, it seems like Koji's direction or priority is already becoming pretty obvious. Boruto's friends fall into the criteria or priority list where each of them must awaken their own powers, starting with Sarada. Yeah, you know what I mean, right? And before we actually get to the main point, I think there are some interesting things we should dig into a little deeper first. I'm sure some of you are wondering who Boruto's top priority is besides Sarada, whom Koji should guide to obtain or awaken their power, right? Then, why doesn't Koji tell Boruto about his friends, especially how to awaken their powers? I mean, are there no alternatives other than sacrifice and death? And must they choose such a tragic path? Also, what if Boruto himself helps his friends awaken their powers, so that they can assist Boruto in his mission to save the world? Yeah, honestly, this might sound a little ridiculous, especially if Koji has to tell Boruto about his friends and how they gained their powers without having to sacrifice their lives. Logically, it definitely won't be that simple. However, looking at various arcs, for some reason there are several examples that make us curious, such as Boruto or Kawaki. I mean, Koji did say in chapter 13 that he would teach Boruto some of the jutsu he had mastered in the future, so Boruto could learn them and, of course, accelerate the improvement of those techniques. But what techniques are those exactly? Because the last time we knew, the Hiraishin technique that Boruto mastered, Koji said it was the result of him accidentally creating his own reversion of space-time ninjutsu, which is very familiar to his grandfather Minato's technique, right? And also about Kawaki. I can say that Koji didn't mention Kawaki, who should have had a great chance of winning or having an impact on helping Boruto by revealing the limiter that should have been removed, but instead, Koji didn't reveal or leak the way to obtain his great power. As proof of this, Koji himself was a little surprised and considered that, essentially, Boruto was cunning, and Koji didn't know what he had already told Kawaki a few days earlier. Because Kawaki's arrival on the battlefield to help Boruto was the point where Koji no longer knew what Boruto was doing or what his plan would be moving forward. I know you might be wondering too. Then where did Boruto learn about Kawaki's offense that was adjusted by Amado if that information didn't come from Koji, right? And this is probably what will become the plot twist later. But if the source of that information really was Koji, then why did he act as if he didn't know what Boruto had told Kawaki? Some theories that might sound unreasonable are that it's actually Boruto himself as the singularity of fate. But what do you think? And this is what makes me curious. I mean, we know that the hottest theory in recent weeks is Momoshiki, but more precisely, it is the influence of Jougan on Momoshiki itself that becomes absolute control or a counter and the like, where Jougan can become the dominant point to suppress Momoshiki itself. Yeah, in other words, Jougan could be one of the answers if the worst happens to Boruto, and that power will save him. And all of this started with something Koji said in the flashback arc when Boruto was training his Hiraishin ability. In short, there was a point that Koji mentioned about how 6 years later, he would manage to master it. We know that, in context, Koji was referring to the Hiraishin ability. But at least, if the Jougan does need to be trained for several years to be mastered, then Boruto can have time to train first. And of course, this is the same as the Hiraishin that he trained before, finally mastering it perfectly, right? Well, regardless of how this scenario plays out, or some worst-case scenarios such as sacrifice and the like, perhaps the way to awaken Jougan cannot be done by simply telling Boruto that in the future, he will master the greatest eye power, just like the Hiraishin ability that Koji mentioned. Because believe it or not, usually, and as it should be, whatever triggers the power of dojutsu eyes like Uchiha and the like, there must be some kind of emotional trigger. So if Koji told Boruto about how the Jougan eye should awaken, then there wouldn't be any surge of emotion rising within Boruto. Because basically, that kind of emotional outburst can only appear automatically from the bad things Boruto experiences unintentionally, right? This pattern doesn't only happen to Sarada and Boruto. Himawari also has the same pattern. If Koji told Boruto that Himawari had Kyuubi chakra, would Himawari immediately master the power of Kyuubi chakra? and successfully prevent Inojin's death at that time? I don't think so. Because, of course, the Kyuubi chakra power in Himawari's body can only awaken if there is an extraordinary emotional trigger within her, and that emotional outburst could only be drawn out through the sacrifice of Inojin's life. This also means that Jougan will only awaken if Boruto experiences a tragedy or extreme emotional turmoil like Himawari and Sarada. The question is, when and how will this scenario unfold? Is Koji the mastermind behind the scenario he is going to create? I mean, is Kashin Koji preparing some worst-case scenarios for Boruto so that he can feel real emotions? Because surely, we know that so far, he has only been a cold person who doesn't give much of an excessive reaction when the worst things happen to his friends. He prefers to act directly and show his actions rather than show his emotional expressions such as sadness, anger, or the like. Yeah, his expressions are more flat. However, for some reason, aside from the assumption that Koji prepared the worst-case scenario to trigger Boruto's emotions and awaken his Jougan power, there are other triggers or reasons that undoubtedly originate from Momoshiki himself. In short, we know that Momoshiki once said Boruto would lose everything. But have you ever thought about whether losing everything only means Boruto losing his friends because he's been branded a traitor and cast out of the village? I mean, could the meaning of losing everything be something more than that? Death, or even being trapped in the tree and turning into a Shinju? Yeah, of course, all of this could definitely be interpreted as losing everything, right? And as a final conclusion, now I know. First, it would be ridiculous if Koji had to tell Boruto's friends to awaken their powers without going through some worst-case scenarios. After all, the more they know how to gain power quickly and instantly, the more it will affect the future and cause it to become more complicated. If you think this title is just clickbait, absolutely not. Because Koji didn't tell Boruto how to awaken Jougan, even though he also mentioned some of the powers Boruto will master in the future, such as Hiraishin, it's not a coincidence that Koji kept it a secret and didn't reveal how to awaken the pure power of the eyes. And even though Boruto is also a singularity of fate, Koji seems to prefer some of the worst possibilities that will certainly trigger Boruto's emotions. So that also means that Koji did not reveal the secret of the pure power of the eyes, not because he did it on purpose or by coincidence. Rather, there are several worse scenarios that Boruto must go through. But besides that, there are also other triggers that are certainly still related to Momoshiki himself. Losing everything is not as simple as we see in Boruto's fate, who is considered the killer of the 8th Hokage and has also lost his friends and family. But it seems that the meaning of losing everything that Momoshiki refers to is more than that and more painful. Like the death of friends or even family, or friends being trapped and turned into a tree. Because in my opinion, death or being trapped in a tree, like Sasuke, is a trigger that makes Boruto experience extreme emotional turmoil and even changes his personality. But out of those possibilities, which one do you think makes the most sense, guys? Or do you have a different perspective? Let me know in the comments. So yeah, thanks for watching, likes and subs. I'm Nim without the E. See you in the next video. Bye bye, Data Bio.